In the first video I made, I mentioned that I had what I called a library of firearms. Every weapon I've bought or have ever been given has been taken down to its last bolt and roll pin in an effort for me to understand what makes it tick. The sheer variety of actions and mechanism amongst firearms has always intrigued me. The internal workings of these tools range from nearly caveman tier to overly complex for no reason other than they could. But a library isn't much good if its contents can't be easily accessed. That is what this room was intended to solve. Now, unfortunately, I didn't record myself making this room because at the time, content creation really wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I did take a boatload of pictures though that I sent to friends and family as I progressed with this project. I will be heavily referencing those pictures and trying to recreate some of what I did to bring this room to life, while also showing you some of its features. Whether you have a firearms collection, an arsenal of airsoft guns or Nerf guns, or really anything else, I think you might get an idea or two by watching this little showcase. And you are going to want to stick around until the end, because this room is so much more than just some shelves and drawers. It wouldn't be a B squared project if I didn't shoehorn in way too many electronics, where there honestly shouldn't have been. But, that's half the fun. Before we go any further into this video, I just wanted to thank today's sponsor, me. As of right now, this channel is still sponsor free. Your support is greatly appreciated in making all of this happen. These videos take a lot of time to produce, so please consider subscribing on Patreon or becoming a channel member to help support future content. You can also check out the merch I have in my merch store, links in the description below. I have some desk mats being produced by popular demand, and will be sure to let you guys know when they are available. It will probably be a couple of months or so keep an eye out in the meantime. With that, let's get back to the video. So, how do you even begin a project like this? No matter how you go about designing your vision, there is one thing that you're going to need: dimensions. So, whip out that tape measure and get to measuring. My gunroom is a converted walk-in closet. When I moved into my home, the closet consisted of 4 white walls, some disgusting carpet, and a pull chain in the center for a light. The bare bones nature of the room made it a great blank canvas to work with. After getting dimensions, I booted up Fusion 360 and got to work creating a rough outline for what I wanted. You don't have to use Fusion 360. You can use Blender, SketchUp, or anything in between. In fact, Fusion 360 might be a weird choice for this sort of thing, but I find it works well enough. One of the most important things you need to decide early on is what kind of atmosphere or vibe are you trying to convey. Looking up references, maybe playing through a game or two or watching some movies is a great way to determine what you're after. It's really just finding what tickles your fancy. Do you want something that looks like a 90s SWAT Armory? If that's too utilitarian, how about something more futuristic? There's no shortage of sci-fi armories and such that you could pull inspiration from. Hint hint, nudge nudge, at some future projects that may or may not involve some hydraulic actuators. The whole Hunter's Lounge thing where every conceivable surface is covered with lacquered wood is also pretty popular. Not my thing personally, but it's out there. I personally love John Wick, like, a lot. I've never been big on meeting movie stars or whatnot, but what I wouldn't give to go shooting with Keanu Reeves just once. I'm guessing 99% of my audience can see where I'm going with this, but I'm a pretty big fan of the Continental and its theming. While I wouldn't say what I did directly copied its theming, I did take some notes from it. Anyways, the reason I bring up the atmosphere is because what you decide on is going to really influence how you go about displaying your collection. There are a lot of existing systems out there for hanging up guns or other things. Some kind of look like huge pegboards, others have slots for stuff to fit into. You could always go with a classic gun rack, but that's going to be a bit limiting and come off a lot less purpose-built, ironically enough. For my room, I went with the mod wall. The mod wall utilizes continuously spaced slots that are 2 inches apart and give a really nice clean look. For what I had in mind, it's basically the perfect solution. There's also some other important reasons why I went with the mod wall that I'll get into later. So, now that I knew what kind of system I was going with, I could figure out how large their panels were and start planning around that. My room is 9 feet tall, and I knew I wanted to use floor for ammo can storage. So I stacked some ammo cans and measured up and gave myself a few inches for a margin of error. Once I did that, I had about 4 feet of vertical space to work with, where I wouldn't have to get up on a step ladder to get a gun down. At the time, they only offered 2x4 panels, so I knew I was going to need 10 panels in total based on the room's dimensions. Now they offer 4x8 panels, and man, I wish I could have gotten those instead. Regardless, once I got the panels, I was able to cut them to size, get them hung, with the help of my old man. Look at that stud. How can you not trust him with your home improvement needs?
Now, for me, here's where the fun really started. I had a general idea of the aesthetic I was after, but I didn't want to clone anything. I wanted to make something that really fit what I liked and what I thought would work for my room.
The Continental's Armory in John Wick is so dang cool. Like, literally. The lighting in the room is very cool and bluish. It works in the context of the film, but I personally prefer warmer light. And that brings me to my next point, lighting. Lighting is one of the single most important things you can do for a display room like this. It's hard for an amateur like me to capture on film because I don't know my camera inside and out like some people do, but in person, the lighting looks so nice and really ties the room together. I knew I wanted the walls to be highlighted somehow. For a bit, I was considering a track light system on the ceiling, but ruled that out when I sketched up a considerably cooler option.
For me, building as you go and expanding on the project is half of the fun for these kind of things. My methods obviously don't work if you're a contractor with a strict deadline and budget, but if you're building it yourself and have the time, finish a part, take a step back, and think about what would look nice with what you just did. I knew I wanted some sort of wood accent in the room, but I didn't know how that would materialize.
These shelves serve a purpose as a way to partition the room and to add some visual flair. They also house gimbal lights that showcase whatever I put onto the walls.
When you're able to take things one step at a time, you stumble across ideas you might have never had otherwise. That's why I advocate that you remain flexible if your situation allows for it.
Building the shelves was honestly kind of a blast. As usual, things started out in Fusion 360 and I went from there. I mapped out the studs in the room and bought some floating shelf brackets. These shelves are freaking heavy, so I went out of my way to get some heavy-duty shelf brackets. I won't tell you what to buy and what not to buy, but I would definitely say don't cheap out on the only thing stopping your heavy wooden shelves from crashing down onto your valuables below. Because I'm not rich, I couldn't afford a 2-inch slab of walnut or oak to build a solid floating shelf all the way around. Instead, I bought some cabinet-grade 3/4-inch plywood and a bunch of 2x4s and got to work making the shelves. This actually worked out well because I needed to install the gimbal lights in these. A solid slab would have required a lot of work to chisel and run out the space required for the lights. Because I didn't want the plies to show, I cut a 45-degree bevel onto the board so I could glue them up after making sure they were nice and square.
Now, I know some people will say I could have used a veneer, and yeah, I could have. In fact, with hindsight, I probably would have. But this is what I did. A huge part of doing stuff like this is learning. Nobody is born with all of the knowledge needed to do anything. You have to learn, and oftentimes the best way to learn is through experience. As my father always told me, the most memorable lessons are often the most expensive. For instance, I learned when cutting a bevel into an 8-foot-long sheet of plywood, it's a really dumb idea to use a construction-grade table saw instead of a track saw or even a circular saw with a straight edge. I have an expensive piece of plywood in my garage with a very crooked cut to remind me of that. I'll find a use for it one day.
Once everything was glued up, I drilled some 4-inch holes using a hole saw. My good old Milwaukee almost died after drilling 2 holes when the thermal protection kicked in and it started to smoke. So, because I didn't feel like waiting for it to cool down, I grabbed my late grandfather's Craftsman and tore through the rest of the holes like it was nothing. Sometimes you just can't beat those angry 120-volt pixies. After prepping the board, I finished it with some Rubio monocoat. If you are into woodworking at all, I'm sure you've watched some of Blacktail Studio stuff before. He's got to be one of my favorite channels, and my countless hours of watching his content is probably what gave me the insane notion that I could pull something like this off to begin with. I have his course on finishing wood projects with Rubio and his N3 nano coating, and I gotta say, it's worth your time. Go check it out if you have not already. The finish is absolutely beautiful. Not too shiny, not too dull. It's hard to capture on camera, but you can see the reflection of the guns if you look at just the right angle.
After installing those, I realized the room just didn't look balanced.
That's when I decided to just Control-C what I did up top and Control-V it at the bottom. More or less the same process down here, except I didn't have to worry about cutting a hole for the lights. That would be kind of weird if I did. Now, I'm kind of starting to move fast, but at some point during this whole process, I decided I wanted to do a shiplap accent wall and shiplap ceiling. It was really easy to do, and I think it adds a lot to the space. I was afraid the black might make it feel confined, but instead it makes it downright cavernous. The exact opposite of my fears. The stonework in the back are actually panels. Now, they make these in a very cheap variety that looks like an early 2000s game dev just discovered what tiling was, and they also make them in higher quality that has a lot more depth and variety. I opted for the latter because I was only doing an accent wall. These things can add up very quickly otherwise. After installing the stone, the shiplap, and shelves, I let the dangerous part of my brain run wild, the part that likes electronics. I mentioned before that lighting is key. I might have taken it a bit far, but man, do I love it. The baseboard and crown moldings both have accent lights that I wired up. They're simple 24-volt DC strips with several different color temperatures. They're not RGB because RGB tends to have a color hue to it, but it does range from 2000 to 6000 Kelvin. So, if I ever wanted to, I could make the room super blue like the Continental. That's certainly a mood.
Earlier in this video, I said there was a very important reason why I went with mod walls over other systems. For me, a big part of it was the ability to make my own custom hangers for whatever I wanted. I like minimalism at times, and I didn't want a generic one-size-fits-all rack or hanger that would hold my guns canted up or down, or skewed, or that didn't allow the exact spacing I wanted.
Because of how Modwall operates, I'm able to actually 3D print my own custom holders. The slots are 2 inches apart, and a standard M5 bolt is the perfect size to lock the whole system into place. Armed with that knowledge, I went out and found the best orthographic pictures of various firearms I own and hung them up on my virtual wall in Fusion. This is how I was able to lay out the firearms in the most aesthetic way possible.
Note that I said aesthetic, not efficient. Could I have fit every gun I own up on the wall? Maybe. Probably. But it would have looked cluttered, and I can't stand a cluttered look. You should see my display and gaming room if you want more proof of that.
So, because I chose form over function, I had a lot of firearms that I still needed to put somewhere. Realizing I didn't have enough ammo to fill both sides of the room, a definite problem that will be fixed later, I decided to make life way more complicated than it needed to be and retrofit a series of drawers instead of just buying some like a sane human being. But were they going to be normal drawers?
Come on, seriously? You're going to ask me that? I know I don't have a ton of videos yet, but you should know better by now.
I designed the frame and drawers in Fusion and got to work. This was a lot easier than the floating shelves because I didn't have any 8-foot long 45-degree chamfers to cut. It was just a lot of cutting square boards, drilling, screwing, and gluing. But as you're aware, it can't be that easy. So I added lights. And seriously, I know it might sound ridiculous, but look at how cool this is when you open them up. The lights themselves are 5-volt strips that are connected to a magnetic door sensor. I calibrated them so that when the drawer is closed, the lights turn off. I did install a master switch in case I ever wanted to turn them all off for whatever reason. At this point, the room is looking pretty awesome, but looks are only part of it. It's gotta sound awesome too.
I warn you guys, I let the invasive part of my brain that loves electronics have a bit too much fun here. I got some thin wired speakers and hooked them up to an Arduino that is in turn hooked up to a wave board. That board allows me to have a micro SD card with dozens of songs and outputs via a simple 3.5mm jack. Some simple coding later, a series of switches that I mounted to a custom 3D printed control panel, and it was done. I'm personally all about being able to customize the experience, so I hooked up a variety of controls here. Like, I could independently turn off the upper or lower lights. I could turn off the whole system or opt not to use the door sensor. Basically, any combo you can think of, you can achieve here. And with that, that's where this room currently stands. Is it my dream gun room? No, it's not. My dream gun room is more of a lounge than an armory. But is it my dream gun room given my current circumstances? Absolutely. One day, I hope to be able to tackle an even larger project when I have the means. But in the meantime, I'll be content with what I've built and what the good Lord has allowed me to have, and pray for favor in the future. While I always encourage people to pursue their dreams, it's equally important to stop and be content with what you have, when you have it. Now, I did do some future-proofing when I designed the room. I realized it probably wasn't always going to be the home of my firearms, so I wanted to be sure that if and when I moved weapons out, it would still be a really nice walk-in closet. Again, that's where the mod walls come in handy. I can 3D print anything I want. That includes hangers for clothing. The future of Mrs. B² is going to have one heck of a walk-in closet. And that's going to wrap up this video. As always, please like and subscribe as it really helps the metrics of the channel. Also, please consider becoming a channel member or pledging to my Patreon. There's not a whole lot of exclusive content right now, but I hope to change that as I move forward. I said it before, but as of right now, everything is still really up in the air, so every cent of support that you guys give me helps a ton. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, have a good one.